Okay, so I think it has started. Struts, we are going to Struts is a very popular MVC framework, and by MVC I mean Model View Controller Framework. And I think we discussed number of times beforehand as well about this one, and it is used in web applications. So MVC framework, all right. Uh, it is used in web applications, all right. Then what else? Uh, the model view controller. What does it stand for, right? So MVC stands for model view controller. Now, what is a D? I mean, what is meant by it? So if you see the servlet as such is capable of doing everything. And when I say everything, you can use the out object, like you do out.print and then put the whatever you want to print on the console, or you use a response and then set the actual response which you want to send back to the browser. So that can be done using the servlet, right? So this can be done using servlet. Then you can also do your business logic, the core business logic. That once you get the data, you get the values from the request. Those values you send it over to the service layer, like the way in which we are doing currently in our mini MVC project. And you go it there, and once you get that data, you send it back to the service layer and save it in the database. So if you see in this example, the servlet as such is doing the dual job, right? And what is a dual job? The dual job is that you have uh, the servlet which is actually taking care of business logic, right? And also taking care of the presentation logic. So the servlet is doing a dual job. Small applications like what we did, fine. But if the application is very big, think from the point of view of Bank of America, Wells Fargo. I mean, they're big organizations, enterprises, what we call, right? So their code is not small. I mean, it's big, and it's very big. It requires a big team to handle it. If you write code like this, it's going to be less maintainable, right? So, from my perspective, I just want to make it clear so that you guys understand. I mean, language, whether you use Java, C, C hash, I mean, that is important. You can learn it over time. Okay, what really is going to help you in industry, and I think you guys have exposure to industry, so you know. So what's really going to help you is the analytical skills, all right, and the skills to write code, which is simple, okay, and follows a proper pattern in the sense that you can box it well, that this piece of code has to go in the service, or this piece of code has to go in DAO, or if you're writing some comment server, it has to go somewhere else. So if you're able to box your code properly, your code will be more maintainable, and that is very very important in today's world, because like writing the code is not a big deal these days, because you have Google and there's so much material available. You can learn it, but nobody can teach you these things. So you have to think from the point of view of writing simple code. Simple code which does the job, very simple algorithm. If the algorithm is too complex for others to understand, either you are doing some like say NASA work, or you are like actually messing it up. There has to be a simpler way to represent it. But if it is not simple, you are introducing chances of error. And I'm saying this in front because you have had like many classes, and slowly you will be able to get everything what I'm teaching, and like work on the industry code as well. So it's very important that you understand that what's more important is to write the code properly, simple but in a proper shape. So coming back to here, if you see this one, now the servlet once it's doing the dual job, if the code is big, it's going to create problems. Over time you'll not be able to maintain it. So if tomorrow, like say I write a code and it is 1 terabyte code, and Usha comes up, she joins and replaces me, and she starts working on it. Now, even if I tell her that this is a servlet which deals with registration, this is a servlet which deals with placing holds on a customer account, and this is a servlet which just this and that, once she starts looking into it and everything is hodgepodge there, it's difficult, right? So that's what's going to happen here. If the servlet is doing a dual job, if it's doing more than what is necessary, it's going to create problems. So that's where the presentation comes into picture. The presentation, sorry, the MVC layer. So MVC layer, the model means the data. So the data which is coming from JSP to the controller, that is the data. Okay. So let's create a separate Java Bean object, a Pojo, which will handle this data. That is a model. Okay. What is view? So view is nothing but the JSP or whatever way you want to select to show this. Alright. Coming back to controller. Controller is nothing but you can say where all the business logic will be put. So now if you see this thing what I'm putting here, now you see patterns, design patterns. This MVC is a design pattern. Is it a big deal if you see from here what does model mean, what does view mean, what does controller mean? I mean it's not at all a big deal. I mean it's just straightforward. It's just pretty much intuitive. If you open your mind, like look into it, I mean the data has to be separated so that you can actually work on it. And you can work on it and maintain the code properly. Alright. So it's not a big deal from the design pattern perspective, and once you understand that where all the things should be put. Alright. So the model basically like whatever you put in the request would get parameter, you can actually create a registration form object. Alright. And have like say username, password, etc. in that. And use it to get populated. Now once you populate that data, you can use it. No need to do request or get parameter and retrieve values from there. Okay. So you're being saved from that hassle. Okay. And you can keep it separate from your servlet code. You do not need to retrieve and create an object there. So that is one thing. View, I mean you do not put anything related to presentation in a servlet. Create a view, create a .jsp file, put everything there. And while returning the response back to the user, I mean in a servlet say that you want to render this JSP, and it will get the content will get generated and it will get sent over to the browser. Okay. And if there is any business logic, you'll have a controller that will take care of it, which in Struts world is called something else, but we'll look into it. Okay. So this is normal model view controller framework architecture. And in market, Struts came first. So it came around, I don't remember the exact date, but it was very famous around 2005, 2006. All the applications which got revamped or being developed around those time frame, around 2002, 2003. I mean, Struts was a big deal. Everyone started using it. Now, slowly and slowly, people started like finding more frameworks, and Spring MVC came into picture, and there are some web works and other MVCs also which came. Then Struts redefined it and launched its new version. So that is the history behind Struts. So right now it's not very famous in industry. Although if you work in any code which has been written 10 years back, Struts would be present. So it's very important to understand it, and you never know what frameworks can come back into picture. There are many folks who still believe that Struts is very good to be like Struts is very easy to use, very straightforward, more reliable. They prefer it. So there are still applications being which are using Struts, maybe not that much. So it's very important that you understand it. But anyways, coming back to here, the model view controller. So this is a design pattern. So I just want to take a break here, 1 minute. I want to ask whether you understand this framework or not. Whatever I just explained is clear to you or not. Guys, I need an answer. Okay, Shalya, fine. What about others? If you have any questions, if you're not able to follow, please come up. Okay, thank you. Now, coming back to Struts, right? So Struts, oh, it's small. So struts, there are two major versions of struts. I mean struts 1 and struts 2. That's how we call it. It's basically 1.1 and 1.2 I mean, but struts 1, the support has been stopped by Apache Struts. They no longer support it, although it was in vogue for long. It was being used for a long time, and we are still we can still use it. It's very stable. The only thing is that if new bugs come up or there won't be any new releases from the Apache Strut side. Okay, they have come up with Struts 2 now. So this is what we're going to mainly deal with, but in between I'm going to give you a fundamental idea about Struts 1 as well, so that you're able to look into it and understand what does it mean. Okay, so coming back here, so Struts 1, as I told you, the model, the view and the control, right? So let's put the things here. So in Struts 1, okay, so we're discussing right now Struts 1. So there used to be a form object, okay, and that object used to be there on the JSP page itself. So if I write my, like say, registration.jsp page, so if I write registration.jsp page, alright, then here I can give HTML:form, and then you can give the form name, I guess, and here you can give registration view or registration form, whatever is the form object, and actually you can import it as well in the starting of the JSP. You have to, or otherwise you can fully qualify the class name. Okay, so this is how you put, and inside, and once you end it, inside that you have all these input tags. Okay, so input name is equal to, say, first name, and then maybe value, you can put a default value here or whatever. I mean, that is not at all necessary, but once you submit the data, and if you're using struts, what will happen is that the registration form object will get populated. The registration form object will have all these attributes which are the input tags within this form. So you'll have one private, say, string f name, and others as well, and plus their getters and setters method also. So this is what registration form will be all about. Okay, so this is the JSP. This is a form object which we are talking about here. Okay, now view, you just saw this is a registration JSP, so I'll just mention it here so that it is clear to you that this is registration form. Alright, this is a registration.jsp. Alright, and once you go, we have action servlets. Okay, so action servlet is the major driving thing in case of struts. Okay, and we'll see the details slowly, but what it does is that you can define action classes in case of struts. Alright, so and those action classes are being invoked from the action servlet. Alright, so the thing is that here in the same stuff, there's one more attribute. You can set action. Okay, and you can say registration. Alright, so now what happens is that once your request gets submitted, okay, so once your request gets submitted, the control goes back to the server, right, and server sees that this is an action name which is registration. So what is the class which should be called? So it goes and checks, and if it checks that the action servlet is configured as as the one which is being used as the dispatcher servlet, that is the one which will see where to put it. So it will go and check for the action servlet. Action servlet will check that with this particular action as registration, what is the corresponding action class. And there, if we have configured the action class as registration action, say it is named as registration action, then it will go and invoke this registration action. Okay, so this will become, and this will take care of all the business logic. Okay, so it will be dealing with the model, it will be calling appropriate methods to get the view. Okay, and then that's it. So it's basically your this is basically registration action dot java. So this is basically the one which orchestrates the entire flow. Okay, so this is the one which actually is taking care of the business logic as such. Okay, this is from Struts 1 perspective. Okay, is it clear till now? Are you guys with me? Guys, are you understanding? Folks, Nirali, others, are you guys clear? Okay. Yeah, we'll understand it again. Okay. So registration form as such is the one which is having the data. So let me remove this part and let's see what is there in the registration.jsp. So this HTML form is on the UI. Alright, and once it is on the UI, if you're using struts, you can give the form name as well. Okay, this registration form is basically a class which is, it's basically a Pojo class in the model view controller architecture or framework. This is taking care, this is representing the model object, so it's holding the data which will be there in the request. So what the struts jar does is that if it sees that the form name is this particular class, like whatever you're putting here, okay, and the values which are being set in the request is say f name, username, password, etc., etc., it tries to set the value which is being passed here in this registration form. Okay, so I'll tell you what it means, and this is from the struts code. I've not seen it. Okay, I just want to add that disclaimer in case I just don't want to pass any wrong information, but this is how it's supposed to work. So this is from struts jar inside. Okay, this is not what you're supposed to do. This is not what you're supposed to. This is what struts is going to take care for you. So what it does is that it sees that form name in the request, HTTP request which comes up, is set as registration form. And if it is a registration form, what it does is inside it creates a new object. Registration form is equal to new registration form. And once you have this, it does form dot set f name and gets it from the request. So it is basically request dot get parameter, and the name is f name. So if you remember from the mini MVC example which we did, this is how we would have retrieved all the parameters from the request. Now retrieving single parameter, then putting it in some object, cumbersome. The form is big, it makes your code unnecessarily long. Okay, so struts, anyways, the model, the data which is there in the request, that is supposed to be represented by the model. Okay, and that model is here. Okay, so this is what, if you denote in your JSP that this is the action, that this is the form name. Okay, then you can set it, you can set the value to like in this registration form from the request, and this is what struts will do it for you. So once you come in the action class, you will have this form object, the model object already populated. Okay, and the methods which are there in the action class will have reference to this registration form so that you can use it. Okay, now this is what is there for registration form. Now what is action class? So action class is a one which is, your action class DOA. What is DOA? The action class is something which is, say, having a business logic, right? So action class has the business logic. Got it? Now the deal with this business logic is, you'll have references to the model object. You can instruct the struts framework to render a specific JSP for the end user, and basically you will send it to the browser, right? So this is what the struts framework is, and the action class is all about. So the action class is basically model view paradigm. It stands for controller. So this is taking care of your business logic. So say your business logic is that once the registration.jsp the end user populates it, that means that he gives the username, password, the first name, last name, etc. Once you receive the data, you have to validate it. Okay, and if the validation fails, you have to return it back to the client saying that username is wrong, or this is not the pattern which we accept, or whatever validation method failed, you can give it back. Or if the validation is fine, you may want to run some of the business rules. Maybe you want to check whether this user is eligible for upgrade or not, or anything, right? So all this business logic will be driven from the controller class. And once that is done, if we want to render a particular JSP, you can direct your server to do it from here. Okay, so that's how your entire architecture is. So Suhas, are you clear on action class as such, like what it means? So this was for struts 1.1. Okay, struts 2, there is small change. Let's go back to the PDF which we have. We'll go through it, we'll see whether you get it or not. Otherwise we'll take some additional questions as well. So coming back to here. So what is struts? As I told you, have model, view, controller. Controller again is the bit which connects the view and the model. So as I told, it has references to model. You can use it to generate the view or the JSP. So it is the action connect. Okay. Now struts, as I told you, it's a popular model view controller framework. The major versions are struts 1 and struts 2. In struts 1, which we discussed right now, action form was used to store the data being sent via JSP, and action class served the role of the controller. So role of view is being served with the JSP, as we discussed right now. Okay. Now the thing with we'll look into this later. Let's see this part. So in struts 1, what we discussed right now, the controller, which I called as action classes, they mandatorily have to extend the action class from the strut side, and that is org apache struts action.action. And once you do that, a method will come, execute method. You have to override that method. Now this execute method has references to everything. So in a sense that the execute method has 3 parameters. One is the action form, which basically in my example was a registration form. So you have a reference to the model data. Then it was HTTP request, so that you can get anything from the request which you want. That is also one of the parameters. And then HTTP response, so that you can set whatever you want in the in the response. So all the three things are available to you in the execute method itself, okay, and then you can use it. So this was till in struts 1. But in struts 2, what the idea was that let's remove the dependency, and this is more going towards using the modern day frameworks. Like if you see Spring MVC and all, right, they do not force you to extend any particular class as being done in the case of struts. You can just write your own small Pojo, pure old Java object, and then use it as action classes. The one which has references from the UI side, right? So Struts 1 was actually lagging in the race of being the front runner because of these scenarios. So in Struts 2, they remove the dependency in action class, so that you can just write your simple Pojo. You can have just one execute method. This execute method is nothing but, it is just a simple public void execute method. There is no parameter as such, and put your logic there, okay. Or if you want, you can extend. It's not necessary. And even if execute method is not necessary, you can say that instead of execute, in my case it is going to be set data, which I am going to call. And if that is going to be the case, there is only one configuration file where we need to go and define that, okay. And that's it. That instead of calling execute, let's call set data method, and this can be configured per action class. So it's not that once you write set data, it's going to be for entire application. For every single in a single action class, the action scenario, you can set different uh, method names, okay. So it removes that dependency in the action class. You can have your own Pojo and you can use it. So that is the deal behind Struts 2. So in Struts 1, as I was telling before, action servlet is a front controller. Struts 2, filter can be considered as the front controller. So what is front controller? So front controller is like, say, action servlet is the one which is there. I'll explain in very simple terms. Action servlet is the one which is standing in the front, okay. So once you give and submit a form, action servlet is the first one to get contacted, and from the action servlet we read the configuration files which are related to struts. We find out that if this is action class, okay, if this is action class, then this is the particular if this is action set in the request, this is action class which needs to be invoked, okay. But action servlet is the one which takes the first hit and it calls the other action classes. So that is a deal behind Struts 1. But in Struts 2, we do not have such action servlets. That concept was done away with, and we are currently have what in Struts world is called as filter, and they accept the request and then they process it. So there is like, say, action servlet had, I think it's done just to reduce that dependency on the servlet APIs, and there is nothing more to it. You can just understand that in Struts 1 it was action servlet, in Struts 2 it was a filter, okay. And then in Struts 2 another powerful thing which was added was interceptors. So you can define the list of interceptors which can intercept your request and do work using that one. So that is another additional feature which is introduced in Struts 2 that is not there in Struts 1, and it helps basically to say make the configurations faster, in the sense that you can have one set of functionality defined as an interceptor, and then you can configure that interceptor for different action classes. So that is a benefit which the interceptor API gives it to you, okay. And below I have an example here, so that will help you understand what I'm talking about. Again, so if it's a web app, you have the project folder, then you have the webinf, which is again, I keep iterating it so that it enters your mind. Webinf is the most important folder. Inside that, if you have lib basically stands for library. So if you have any classes, okay, so if you have anything which with the jar which is responsible, like say in our mini visit project we required MySQL connector, that has to be here somewhere or the other. The references has to be here, so that I mean the web application is able to access it. Okay. Then you have this web.xml where everything is defined, and here only we define the action servlet or the filter. Then you have the struts XML. So struts XML, for now, let's understand that this is one of the configuration XMLs required by the struts application. Okay, and then you have the JSP and the static resources part. Now let's start one by one. So first of all, we have created one index JSP. Now if you see, and don't get bogged down by this, the tags which are used here, like they are part of some advanced course. So in the next class we are going to deal on the tags which are being used here. For now, just understand that it's a form, you have stuff out there. Okay, so here the actions configured, again this is struts 2. So that's why the form name, the registration form which I defined, is not defined here. Okay, so here we just define the action class, and then inside that, since we are using struts tag, you are using s colon text field or s colon submit. If you can use HTML tags as well, there is proper support for it in struts, but there you have to use HTML colon form, and then directly you can use input tags. Okay, so you have this text fields defined, and you have the action class, and this is how once you hit the action class, this is the first JSP which gets rendered to the end user. Now, as I told, in web.xml you will make the entry. So see, here you are making an entry for the filters, because you are using it here as a filter. So you defined a filter here, which is basically struts prepare and execute filter. So if this filter is defined, I mean this is given by struts itself, and basically will mean that struts itself will not going to do anything. I mean it's just going to take the request, call your action class. Okay, that is the only thing. So that's why they have defined the filter here. If you want to do more than this, you can define your own filter. And this is struts 2. Okay, if it was struts 1, you should have mentioned the action servlet name here. Where the action servlet was again provided by the struts itself. You do not need to like write it down unless you have some specific modifications which has to be done here only. Okay, so if that is not the case, you have to, I mean, just write that action servlet name. And once you write that action servlet name, I mean that after it checks one struts config XML, that what are the action classes configured, and then it executes a particular action. In case of struts 2, you have that struts.xml where all the configuration is defined. Okay, now let's write the action class. So if you see the action class, what do you have here? So the action class here as such, let's see this product.java, it has both information. So it has whatever is a form object that we are directly defining it here. So the idea of having a separate form object was done away with. So in the action class itself, you can have it. If you want, you can externalize it, but you can have it in the action class itself. There is no need to have it separately. Okay, and then you define all the getters and setters. So struts 2, once it loads this, once it calls this action class, all the attributes will be set. So all these data elements, ID, name, first name, whatever, will be set and sent back. Okay, and if you see here, you have an execute method. So this execute method gets returned, gets executed, and it always returns a string. Okay, since it's a very simple example, we have not done any logic inside execute method. We're just returning success. And what this string is, once you are defining, and we are going to see it later, in the same example once we go below, you will see that this is showing the configuration that if the name is success, then this is a JSP which has to be rendered. If the name is failure, this is a JSP which has to be rendered. So it basically is a reference to the view which has to be rendered. Okay. Now we'll see the struts.xml file, which is a very important file here. So we'll just see this thing first and then go and uh, look towards the individual elements. So this is here, if you see, the action name is defined as product, okay, because that was, remember, in the GSP itself, the action was defined as product, then the corresponding class which will deal with it, and then wherever you want to forward. So if you see here, for success, we have to render welcome.jsp. So that's what you just need to return, and the core struts 2 framework will take care of rendering welcome.jsp. Okay, so that's how it works. If it was struts 1, you'll have to specifically write a code that mapping dot find forward, and then it will get rendered, but not in case of struts 2. There you just define it, you return the string, and then the core framework will take care of rendering that particular JSP. So let's see one by one what are the tags which are inside this particular struts.xml. So again, I mean, this starts with struts tag. I mean, the topmost tag is struts, that is a root tag. Okay, this represents the entire application. Inside that you have multiple packages. It is nothing but a sub element. It just represents a module, and there's some like configuration. Like if you see this, it extends a struts default package. In this default package itself, remember we are discussing about interceptors, etc. Many default interceptors are already configured. So there are 8 kind of interceptors which are already defined along with this struts default package. So every request will be passing through all those 8 interceptors. Okay, so that is being configured in the struts default package. So if you remove that extends struts default package from the package element, everything will flow through. Okay, there will be no interceptors as such. Then the action element which we saw, that action element represents action class. You have the name which is there in the JSP, and then the class and the method attributes. Okay, and in the same stuff, wherever you have mentioned action name class, remember I was discussing that instead of method as execute, then I have method as set data how. So this action has one more attribute as method name. Okay, if you do not specify it, the default is execute. If you specify it, that is a method from this particular class which is going to get called, and that extends struts default. It happens at the package level. Okay, inside package a sub module, you define all the struts action classes which you are using. So this in short is what we have, and then this welcome.jsp. So once you have entered the details on the index.jsp and you return success from the action class, you can like use this view component to render whatever you just saw. So once you input the details, click on submit, then it goes to the product class, and from the product class this execute method gets called. From there we return success, right? And from the success, if you see the struts.xml, the configuration is to load welcome.jsp, and that's how we come here to welcome.jsp. And then all the values which are there on the action class, the ID, name, price, etc., that is being displayed. So it's a very simple action class. One thing is that like we are defining it. I mean, like we have decided to put this here so that it's easy for you to understand. And again, the lib folder struts.jar was required, so we will put it. And the same way in which you deployed your mini MSc registration project, you have to deploy it. So that's how this entire application will work with struts.2. See, and this is the visual representation. This is the first page, the index.jsp. Once you enter the details here, click on submit. This is the welcome.jsp which gets rendered next. And here we are just displaying the data, whatever we entered. So is it clear till now? Did you guys understand? Guys, I need an answer. Did you understand? Okay. What about others? Other folks, did you understand? So when you say little bit, is there any piece which you did not understand, or you just need time to digest everything? Other folks on the class, I need answers from you guys as well. Yeah, we'll discuss that then. Other folks, Rina, you understood it? Okay, fine. So that's okay. Okay, so struts and servlet. Now, servlet is the basic thing. Okay, behind every MVC framework which you deal, whether it is struts, Spring MVC, or anything else, servlet is a backbone that has to be there. Okay, so and the action servlet which is talking about in struts 1, I mean, that basically, or these filters, if you see their source code, they will be like the defined as servlets. They must be extending this servlet APIs. Okay, there should be servlet class and overriding do get and do post APIs. Okay, the only thing is that it's not made visible to you, so that you can concentrate mostly on the business logic. Think from the point of view of distributed teams. So everyone need not know what a servlet is, what servlet API stands for, but they are able to code on the basis of normal, pure, simple Pojo. Okay. So the answer is struts and servlet work together. Struts is built on top of the servlet. Okay. It uses a servlet APIs only. Inside it has to use a servlet, and it does. Okay. Only from the outside it gives you a different way to put data so that you can categorize your work properly. So that is how the relationship is between struts and servlets. Struts is never going to replace servlets. Struts is using servlets. Okay, that's the deal is. Is it clear now, Nirali? Okay, so let's move forward. Now coming back to action support class. So now if you see this execute method which we wrote, or the simple product action which we have, it was fine, but what if you need some additional features? What if you want to validate the incoming data? What if you want to introduce internationalization? So there's some stuff which is already implemented on the default level by the action support class. This is one of the uh, like classes which already comes along with the struts jar. All right, and you can use it. So if you want to use it, then if it's required to use it, then the product class, the action class which we saw just now, there you have to extend action support. Okay, and once you do that extending of action support, you have like it has implemented many interfaces. If you see the UI, like say it implements validatable, validation aware, etc., etc. So if it implements validation aware, okay, so if it implements validation aware, then you have reference to validate method, and in the validate method you can define all the validation APIs, all the validation rules you want to put for on the top of the model data. Okay, so that action support class is used for that. So you can even override the validate method of action support. You can include your own field level validation there. Okay, and let's see, if you want to set some value session, you need to be servlet request aware. Now if you remember the last class, no, I mean not last class I said, but what were the example we dealt just before, we had one action class, right, product class. Now in the product class you see, and you can ask a question like say you will have session HTTP session object, and this session object is used to set data which can be used across that particular session. So in the sense that once I as a user logs into a site, and till the time I log out of the site, I mean, all there are different requests I fire to the application. Like maybe I click on the product list, I click on buy now, I click on small icon to see the product info, etc., etc. Whatever the information comes up, all this constitutes one session. Okay, and in the servlet one, it is represented by one unique object, which is HTTP session. Okay, so if you see the previous example which was there, the product action, right? Now this product action which was there, that did not have any API or any reference to get the uh, session details. How to do it then? So the idea is that you can implement this uh, like say servlet request aware. So here this my action class is extending action support, so it's having reference to those validate APIs I was telling about. And then if you implement servlet request aware, then obviously you get a method which is set servlet request. So it basically is a way that what the container, the struts jar does is that it tries to find in the class path which are all the action classes which are implementing servlet request aware. And if they're implementing servlet request aware, it means that they want to know about the actual request object which is coming in. And if that is the case, I mean, set this value accordingly what they want. So during loading by itself, this is set, and once new request comes up, I mean, you always get a reference to the HTTP servlet request. And from the HTTP servlet request, you can get a reference to the session as request.getSession, and then you can set attribute etc. in that. So that is how your you can set values in the session. There is another way as well, which is basically there is one more interface implement instead of implementing servlet request aware, you can implement session aware interface, and you can directly get a reference to those key value pairs as session map, and then you can put details in the session, you can remove details from the session, you can retrieve details from the session, which basically is a key value pair, a session map. So these are the two ways in which you get reference to the session. So see what I mean, again, let's draw a comparison between struts 1 and struts 2 so that it is very clear to you. Okay, so in struts 1, what did we discuss? So there will be one action class. The action class would be having execute method. The execute method would be having few of the input parameters such as HTTP servlet request, HTTP servlet response, and action form, which basically in our example was the registration form. So the registration form data in our present example is already present in that product class, so registration form is not required. Then you had reference to request and response. So request as such, you can get it by implementing by implementing servlet request aware, and then you can get the session from it also, or if you want only the session, you can do it by implementing the session aware interface. So the idea here is to get access to as least data as possible. So if you do not require the request object, why to implement the servlet request aware and get confused? Okay, only if you require it, use it. Otherwise, find something which only gets that data, which in case of session is we get it by implementing the session aware interface. Okay, so that's how it is. Let's move forward. So here if you see, I have just put an example of using action support class. So this particular action class, okay, is extending the action support, and execute method again is there, it's just returning success, so that configuration will be there in the struts.xml. Okay, and then you have the model data which is directly here, all this name, password, the getter and setters. Okay, and then you have this validate method where you have the field level validation. So if something is not available, you can set the field error and then you can access it also, but that's how you put whether the username details are there or not there. All this field level all these field level validations would be done. Okay, so basically you can put all your validation requests here itself. Okay, So let's move forward. In Struts 1, there used to be one class, and I'm drawing parallel always so that you have an idea about both Struts and in Struts 2 and you're able to relate it, because there is like some major difference between the two frameworks as like the classes etc which is used. So once you go back in the industry and start working on it, you need not get confused. The familiarity should be there, that what is there and what is not there. And many of the experienced people, if you go and check with them, I mean, they might not be even aware of Struts 2. I mean, this is a plain fact. So if you guys know about it, it would be great. Struts 1, the request processor class, is the actual place where the request processing takes place, and request first reaches action servlet class, and this is Struts 1. And then from action servlet, the request processor class is invoked. There's one method process from there, process, that gets invoked. Process is the one which looks into the struts config XML, tries to find the action class which is related, and executes it. Okay, so that's how the Struts 1 framework comes into picture. In Struts 2, the same work is done via interceptors. You don't have request processor class as such. You have interceptors, which you have to intercept a client request. You have to do some pre-processing and post-processing work, and go ahead. So that's how it is done. The request processor, that there will be process API which will be called from the struts, and that will take care of reading the action class. I mean, done away with. Okay. So if any request processing would have to be done, like anything which is common across all these several classes in Struts 1, it had to be done in the request processor, because that was the entry point. Okay. So basically you'll have to like modify it. Okay. And then again like make an entry in the web.xml that this is the modified request processor which I want to use. But that is not the case in the case of Struts 2. You need not modify the request processor class, and it is more in line with the object oriented paradigm which we discussed long back, that a class should be open to extension but not for modification. So you can basically extend it and do whatever you want, you need not modify it. So here that's why they have delegated all the work to interceptors. Interceptors works on everything and gets you back the details. Now interceptor is also a class, right? And it has three methods. One is init, which is basically doing the initialization work. One is intercept, where the actual work goes in. And then the destroy, that once your application is being shut down, what do you want to do from here? So that goes inside the interceptor part. Okay. And as telling before, the struts default.xml, the package we're extending struts default, the struts default, but that has 8 interceptors configured by itself. You need not worry about it, that is already out there. If there is something additionally required, you can use any other interceptor. In fact, you can write your own interceptor. Okay, so let's see this big diagram to understand how these interceptors work. So once this action class request comes, interceptor is the first one to get a reference, and if any work has to be done, it will do it, then send it over to the action class. An action class using that success or failure or whatever string returns back the response, which again is intercepted by the interceptors, and then the response is returned back, the HTML is returned back. So this is how the interceptor flow is all about. Okay. So if you want to implement an interceptor, okay, you have to implement this particular class which is mentioned here, which again is provided by struts only. So which is com.opensymphony.xwork2.interceptor.interceptor. Okay. Now this is the one which is a class which you have to implement. I mean, it is interface, I guess. Yeah, it is interface. And when once you implement it, you'll get few APIs like intercept API, where you have a reference to action invocation class as such. Okay, and this interceptor has to be configured in the struts.xml, and it has to be linked to the action. So these are the steps in which you create. So you basically create a class which implements this particular interface. Then inside this you get a reference to intercept method. You put your API details in the intercept method. Then you configure that you want to use this interceptor, this new class which you have just written. That configuration has to be done in the struts.xml file. And once the configuration is done, you know that this interceptor will be used, but with which particular action class. So that linking also has to be done. So let's see details of all these steps one by one. So again, here we have extending abstract interceptor, which provides a default implementation for all the APIs which are there in the interface which we mentioned above. Okay, and in this intercept API, you have a reference to action invocation. This invocation gives you access to everything, including session, as you see here, and including request object. You can get the request object also from here. And then from this session, if you see in this API, what they're doing is that they're doing session.get, and whatever value was already set in the session, if it was login ID, you get that value. And if it is null, maybe you want to direct the flow to the login page, or like say if you just want to show the login JSP. And if it is not null, it means that the login ID is there. It means that maybe this, I mean, the customer has already logged in once, so we'll not validate it again. We need not redirect him to the login page to enter user ID and password again. So what we'll do here is we'll just do invocation.invoke. And invocation.invoke is nothing. This is a default thing. This is your way to send the control to the action class. So this is what is the pre-processing which will happen once an interceptor comes into picture. After pre-processing, invocation.invoke gets called, which basically transfers the control to the action class. And once this is being returned, if you want something else to be done, that will be done in the next level of code. That is basically the post-processing of the request. That is what is being done here. Okay, so this is the interceptor class which we are talking about. Now again, we have to define it here, right? See here, inside the package, this is struts.xml, the root element is struts, and within that you have to have package which denotes the module. And again, it is also extending the struts default XML which we have. And then various action classes are defined here. Apart from that, you also define the interceptor. If it is an already existing interceptor, like you have defined this interceptor here, and you define the class and you define how you will call it. So in this case, we're calling it as login interceptor. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it Abhishek, Reena, Raghav, whatever you want. And then you can define that maybe in one go, there are the 5 interceptors which will be used. So you have to basically define the interceptor stack. Okay, so in this case we have defined that the interceptor stack, if it is being referred by say login stack, it means that 2 interceptors will be configured. One is login interceptor and one is default stack. So default stack basically means that all the 8 interceptors which are defined in the struts default.xml, that will have a reference here also. Okay, and apart from that, one extra interceptor which is a login interceptor which you have written. Now if you go below and see in this home action, the interceptor has been defined as login stack. So it means that login stack has to be used for pre-processing and post-processing of the request. Okay, so if you remember the steps, what is the first step? The first was create a class that implements that interface. So we did that by extending the abstract interface, the first thing. What was the second thing? Second thing was to make an entry in the struts.xml. We did the entry here. Okay, we also linked it to a particular action class wherever it is required. So these 3 things are there. So I think this is what we have done. I mean, like these 2 things, whatever I told is like in one go. You implement the class, you also implement the intercept API which is coming along with it. In struts.xml, the interceptor is configured and it is linked to a particular action. Okay, and to link to particular action, you have to define it here within the action tag. There will be an additional tag which will be for interceptor reference. Okay, now again, if you see here, what all things are there. So you have result name as success, result name as login, so all this information is present. Okay, now this is what all I had for today, but anyways, we have covered a lot. If you have any questions, I mean, you can ask. I mean, this part or any other part, like let's shoot any questions if you have. Folks, are you able to understand till now? What's that stack meaning? What? Like which stack? The login stack you're referring to? When you say both, I mean we only have one stack, right? Login stack. Oh, you mean the login stack and the default stack? See, the stack is, I mean, what? So it has, uh, see, number of intercept. If a request comes in, you might not be wanting to execute only one interceptor. Your idea is that maybe there are 4, 5, 10, 15, or maybe n number of interceptors which has to do the pre-processing before a request comes in. So it basically means that all those interceptors code has to be called one by one. So if all those 8 interceptors or 10 interceptors, whatever you want to use before uh, calling a request and before sending the response back to the browser, those interceptors has to be configured. Okay, and if they are configured, that is defined in the form of a stack. That these are the 5 elements or 10 elements or 8 elements or 8 interceptors which are together and they have to be executed in the same order. So it becomes that stack. The default stack is what comes default. So if you extend this struts hyphen default, remember we discussed earlier in the same class that there are 8 interceptors by default which comes with the struts hyphen default. So if you just define this interceptor stack, you do not write the default stack, you'll lose the reference. So what will happen is that you'll only execute the login interceptor, not the other default stacks which comes along with it. Okay, so that's why that default interceptors, to get a reference to it, you have to include a reference to the other stack, the default stack, which is configured in the struts default XML. So now do you understand both the stacks, login stack and default stack? Okay, thank you. Any other questions, guys? Let me ask you this question. So, what we discussed till now, is it sufficient for you to uh, go ahead and modify the mini MVC project which we worked on the lines of struts 2? Can you do that? But we discussed all the theory along with examples. Yeah, I mean, if once you go through this video, that will be more than enough, right? I mean, we have covered everything, whatever is required. So basically, if you want to write a struts enabled application, a struts 2 enabled application, it's the same web application. In the web.xml, you need to do a change. You need to put a reference to a filter, and all the request has to move through that filter. First thing, okay. Second thing is that you need to define all the action classes in that struts.xml, and the content of that struts.xml is going to be similar. And for every action, you need to define the class and what JSP to render if it is successful, what JSP to render if it is failure. That definition has to be done. Apart from that, the core code you already have. The servlet code, whatever you have written, most of the code, I think you can move it to the action class you will write. So that is the chain which you have to do, nothing else. So what problem? I mean, can't you guys go ahead and modify modify the project which you worked on? Okay. Any other questions which you have? Okay, so I take it that you guys are fine. Uh, let's go below and see this assignment which is there. Again, I put the same stuff which which is discussing right now, that our MVC project we have to start using struts for it, struts 2. Okay, and the thing is that unless you do this, let's not go forward. So I need all of you to work on it, all of you who attended the class today, to sit down today, tomorrow, whenever you want, go through this video, modify your app, your struts project, you modify your mini MVC project, make it a struts 2 project, and make it working today itself or maybe by tomorrow, and send me the code. Okay, and Nirali and others, you also worked on the XML parsers. Let's complete that assignment too. In the next class, we'll discuss on these two things first and then move forward. But before doing that, it's very important that you complete this thing so that we can discuss it properly, otherwise it's difficult. Okay, please work on it. Alright, this is what we had for today, nothing else. If you still have any question, let me see.